Thank you. Boom, share screen, desktop. All right. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Let's see who's here. And then I want to jump into a couple of things. Let's close all that out. And let me just do attendance here. So Luke is here. Anson, Jake is here. Caleb is here. I talked to him this morning. Nico's here. Hannah's here. Maddie is here. Claire is here. Michaela's here. Sarah's here. Melody's here. William is here. And you good? Okay, and Emma's here. Awesome. All right. So a couple quick things, couple clarifying things. When we originally had the Project 3 news story due today, we swapped. I think a couple people or a number of people said it would be really helpful to have one more day. So I had swapped that to next time, but I had not swapped when the quizzes and stuff were going to be due. So I've cleaned that up this morning because several people said, oh, there's a quiz due today, but it's not visible. It's because when I swapped it all around, I hadn't swapped the quizzes too. So over the next 3 days, we're getting a deeper understanding of post-production sound. So sound for video and audio. And we're going to walk through today what that whole workflow looks like. So first off, show of hands, how many of you, all of the audio you've made in every video, you've done the audio in Premiere? Like any of the audio stuff you edited, did your audio and editing, mixing in Premiere. Okay, everybody? Let me phrase it a different way. How many of you did your audio in a separate program for your video? 2 people, okay, maybe 1, okay, 3. So, but most people not, you just do it in the video editor. So when we talk about a professional video production, virtually always that audio is gonna initially be leveled out or roughed out in your NLE, your nonlinear editor, so Premiere, Final Cut, whatever. But ultimately, all of those audio bits are going to be sent out in an audio compatible session format to an audio engineer that's then gonna take the tools, clean it up, build the rest of the sound design, the sound effects, add your hard effects, add your ambiences, add your soft effects to create the environments. And then that will be sent back to your NLE, to your video editor, as either stems or an OMF file for further editing. So we're going to walk through that process, but the LinkedIn video and quizzes over the next few days, I've got the first couple of them up. This last one will be up here this weekend, but those are going to walk you through this process so that you can see that entire process. I'm going to overview it today, but then there's quizzes over each one of those things. We did this because 2 things. Number one, when I talked to Rick about what do students in the later classes after this need more experience on, he said we still have a lot of students that are struggling with audio. They just don't do enough of it. And I can tell you that as somebody that started in audio and taught audio for 20 years and moved into video alongside that, the number one differentiator between somebody being an always hire in the video side of things is if they know audio. If you know audio, if you've spent the 20, 30, 100 hours to just learn it well enough that you feel confident with it, that person is 100% of the time going to be hired over somebody that doesn't know audio, hasn't spent the time to mix it, hasn't spent the time to understand any of the processes, just hasn't spent the time. And because it's really common for video people to just think the audio is some sort of black box that's impossible to know and understand, whereas audio people actually pick up video very easily. Audio people are used to working with 24 to 64 tracks of audio, each one of which we manipulate with slight little methods and processors. And then we route that all into video, where a lot of times you're dealing with just a couple of clips or a couple of tracks, and you're just choosing which one you want to see. So audio people pick up video tend to be very easily, but video people tend to think that the other direction is not possible. I'm here to tell you it's not only possible, it's also a career changer. It's a whole modifier in terms of if you understand audio and you've worked with it enough, you feel comfortable, you don't even have to do audio, but you will get more work as a video person. By contrast, that's one of the easiest ways to not get asked back onto a set, especially on smaller productions. If they have you tasked with running a camera and you're not also monitoring the audio with headphones and making sure that you're getting clean dialogue from the bride and groom or the commercial or whatever it is, if audio is going to be a part of the video, audio from the set, then you need to know all of the key things that we've talked about already. Getting the microphone close to the source, eliminating as much background sound or reverb as possible. All of those things go into getting good quality audio. But then we get to the actual workflow process. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about that. I'm going to walk you through it from the start of a project in Premiere, show you what that looks like, getting it over into Audition, mixing that down, and then bring the final STEM results back into Premiere Pro and why we would do that. So next class, just so we kind of have an overview of the next couple of weeks, next class, we're going to be watching your project 3s. So project 3 videos. So we'll be watching those in class. We'll be providing feedback and you'll be providing class critiques. So you'll actually be entering your own grade rubric. I'll give you a form that everybody can do. So some portion of your grade is going to be from the feedback from the class as well. So make sure that you put good time and energy into it. So, but the benefit then of doing project 4 right after is project 4 is going back and doing the kind of sound design that we're going to be walking through and adding that sound design to the project you just shot. So after we go through this today, I'm hoping to give you the last half hour to check out one of the Zooms that Jackie's got here. So you can go out and start making at least an initial capture of your audio files to be able to add into project 3. But you don't need to turn them in project 3, but you'll just use the same Premiere session and start adding your sound design to it afterwards. Cool. So the objective is that we continue to build on these skills. All right. And then finally, there was a couple of questions about project 6, the concert B-roll. We'll talk more about that next time, but I'm just going to open it up and make sure everybody's clear on what that is. One of the #1 requests I got previous semesters was we need more projects like making us pick up a camera and shoot stuff. We need more pieces for our portfolio. And every project really in here has been like create, produce, pre-produce, do the whole thing soup to nuts. But some of the things that you will get hired for is just, can you shoot this kind of environment or this kind of environment confidently and get good content? So that's why we introduced the B-roll project at the beginning, because it really was mostly about shooting good B-roll. Can you get good, consistent, well-exposed, well-balanced, properly color balanced footage? And then we just did a quick edit with some music and a little voiceover. The concert project is the same. You're just doing it with concert footage. So to be clear, if you read this, what it is not a multi-camera concert recording. You're not even trying to capture a song. You're trying to build a portfolio of pieces that you get. So in this project, you'll shoot B-roll footage of a concert and edit it into a 1-minute portfolio piece. So you will shoot it, choose any song. You should choose a song that's at least in the genre of the concert that you shot. You're not going to be using the sound from the concert. It's a shooting project, but you don't want to have footage that you shoot at some metal show and then choose some acoustic song to go underneath it. Unless you're just trying to be funny, but it wouldn't look very good. And the objective is we have more pieces in your portfolio. So when I get a call saying, hey, looking for somebody to hire to do this, or when you get somebody that says, hey, can you shoot a concert? You go, absolutely. Here's my portfolio piece. You can see what I'm capable of. Does that make sense? So it's about your shooting abilities. That's the objective. Yes.
The music we choose to put in the background, should we worry about copyright or something in our portfolio?
You could just use one of the ones inside the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite. Yep. And then what I did was down here at the bottom, so here's your project grading, quality of the B-roll, variety of camera angles, etc. And then here's an example shot list. So just generated an example shot list that you could grab, but you can use your own shot list, grab some stuff off ChatGPT, make your own shot list. And then I made just another little voiceover script that you can use, or you can do your own. So ChatGPT will gladly and easily write a 1-minute script for you. So the objective of those things is not that they take a long time. You should be able to do that stuff quickly, but it's the practice shooting the concert. Questions about that? Is that clearer? Because there were some people that thought it was a different project and they just hadn't read the instructions. Okay, I would still say to use a tripod. Every time even an experience comes back to me with a handheld shot with a DSLR, it looks like garbage. It's always shaky. And especially because to get a lot of these shots, you will need to use the longer lens. You're going to want to do ideally a concert where there's really good lighting. So I would strongly recommend one of the showcases, because literally everyone in this class, if you could go to the showcase, could get great footage. It's going to look fantastic. You're not going to have any issues with taking a camera in to shoot it. Whereas if you go to a concert at the Schermerhorn or someplace else, probably not going to be able to run around with a DSLR getting the shots that you need. So, but you don't have to shoot hours if you need to, if you're downtown Nashville and you want to put one of those together. There's lots of those artists looking for shooters too. So good question.
So this is pretty similar.
Basically the same thing. Yep, you're just different voiceover and a different scenario to shoot. In future semesters, I'm going to add, I think, even more of them and just announce them all at the beginning of the semester. We'll do the B-roll one. This one I just did 2 because I didn't want to overwhelm everybody, and I wanted to see how 2 things like this go. The other thing I would like to do is have people shoot a spoken head or like a convo sort of thing, or I've been trying to figure out how to get you all shooting a wedding, because there's great money in that. There's lots of shooters here in town, production companies that are always looking for second shooters for a wedding. Next semester, I'm integrating TEDx so that my classes will help shoot the TEDx thing, which will be both a good portfolio piece and great practice and experience. Yes.
This isn't related to the project, but you talking about grading just made me remember. What are you putting the grades from the projects we've already done, like the breakdown, into the Dropbox?
Are they not there? Okay. Remind me here when I let everybody go to do sound effects, and I'll put those over in. So I probably right before spring break. I showed them to you though, right? But I just must not have screenshotted it and stuck it in the Dropbox. Sorry about that. So yep, I will do that here right in a little bit. Awesome. So is everybody clear on what that is? So the next time you're like, oh, hey, there's a concert, you need to be checking out a camera, make sure you get both lenses, go and pull your shot list, get a bunch of stuff, and then you should be able to edit that together pretty quickly in an evening or less. Cool. All right. So for this, let's see, project, when we're talking about this next one, the sound design one. So sound design. Okay, so you're in this project, you're going to learn how to record, edit, and mix sound effects for a video using the Zoom, capture different types of sound effects, such as ambience, hard effects, and using soft effects and mixing them in a video production. So we're going to talk about that today, what that looks like. We'll talk about the differences between sound effects, and then do some practice recording sound effects. And then next time after we're done watching your presentations, we'll look a little bit more at transferring your project 3 into Audition for doing your sound design. So I'm going to show you that process now, but we'll walk through it together because you should all have finished Premiere files at that point, ready to be transferred to Audition, and then you'll just be adding your sound effects. So it's going to be similar in some regard to the Audition project we did in Survey, but you're going to be capturing your own. Cool? All right. So let's take a look at this and make sure we understand the workflow and what this looks like. Let me hide this thing real quick. All right, so here I've got a project. This is a simple little project, and you can actually download this demo project. I've got it right here, this demo session. You don't need to download it right now, but if you want to kind of get a better feel for what's in there, you could click on that and you could download. But let me walk you through. So everyone knows what you're seeing right now. Here's a simple little video project. But what are some of the things that have already been done to this that are different from what maybe you have done on your project 3? Well, if we zoom in on this, here you can see it's just a little scene that's been set up. And when we play it back, actually, I'm going to make sure, let me make sure that my audio is sharing. Check computer sound. Okay. And then route this audio to Crestron. All right. So what are some of the things that you see that are already different, maybe from what you've got in your video? Well, we can see that in these cases, a lot of these audio clips are not in sync with the video clips. We've actually already moved, using the roll tool, moved these around to create J cuts and L cuts. What's a J cut and an L cut? Anybody? So an L cut, you can see right here, for example, this video, as this guy's walking in, and right as it cuts over to this scene, if we kept this edit at the exact same place, let me just roll this back over here, you'll notice that transition is pretty harsh. When the sound changes at the exact same time as the video, it kind of creates this jump in the audio, and all of a sudden it takes us out of the immersion. So an L cut is when we keep the sound that's happening from one scene or one clip, and we roll that over into the next scene. So let's see when we might want to roll this into. Right? So right until up here is actually when he started to say something. So it would be very common for us to take this roll tool and roll this over so that the sound of that ambience continues on into the next scene. You can see that it looks like an L here. Boom, boom, left to right. So this L cut carries that scene right up to this point. Now, you definitely still hear it change when he says Susan, but the process makes sense. If we're going to be making a cut, but we need to carry that scene audio out, we simply want to roll that audio over into an L cut. You can see the same thing on the other side. In this case, he's talking to her. He says, Susan. But because we've got, once he says Susan, we've now got this next piece that starts. And the audio is obviously very different, much less air conditioning noise. Maybe the air conditioner had shut off in the meantime, but they moved this with a J cut. J cut being just the opposite of an L cut, to where you actually start the audio before the video clip. So it looks like a J. So moving those edit points around is step one, moving them to where the edit points are going to let you focus on the audio, but not necessarily have the audio match up perfectly to every scene change. We're going to move those around to where we can minimize the audible transitions. Now, I definitely hear this still here, but look at what happened if we try to roll this over this way. Now she says, oh, I'm going to put that right up to her, oh, and make it more of an L cut now. Let's see what it sounds like. Right, so it doesn't work because this one, in this take, she started to say, oh, right there, but then she didn't say, oh, on this screen until later. So that's why they used a J cut here to hide that right after the Susan, even though right now the change in ambience is pretty audible. Right, so that's something we're gonna have to do what? We're gonna have to hide it in some way. We can fix the broadband noise, or more likely, we're gonna add in room tone, a whole nother layer of room tone, so that as we cut these dialogue pieces down to just the dialogue and add our fade ins and outs, that room tone will hide those edits and mask them underneath. So that's step one, is we're going to go through and move all of our edit points to try to maximize just the words we want, minimize those jumps in audio. Now, in this case, this audio was recorded with two separate mics. This is very common when we're doing especially something more film-like. On a video shoot, though, we will often have two things, either the boom mic on the camera, if you're using more of a video camera that has a built-in hyperdirectional microphone, or the lav, or both. So typically we're recording both. What's the advantage of either using a remote boom or a boom on the camera versus something like a lav? What are the advantages and disadvantages? Yeah.
More focused direction, so you can point out what you want.
Okay, so boom mic, if you've got the boom mic, for example, right overhead, a lot of times it can reject the other sounds around. A lot of times a boom mic will sound most natural, but also if you're shooting run and gun, you've either got to have a whole separate person running around holding it. So that's why you typically only see them on film sets, or you somehow have to be setting it up yourself. So typically, or it's got to be a locked down thing like an interview. So we almost always are going to use a wireless lav as well. Wireless lavs tend to sound very focused and very close, and they don't pick up much of the environment. So sometimes people don't like them as much, but also your boom mic can get in the shot. So if the camera is doing any sort of moving, keeping the boom out of the shot can be a real hassle. So, and wireless lavs are a lot of times going to be just the simplest way to get a safety. So in this case, you see that they were capturing one to one side and one to the next. Let's go see what this looks like. Okay, so I'm going to solo this first one, and let's listen to what that one sounded like. Okay, so how's that first one sound in terms of his voice? How would you describe it?
It's like he was super close and then it kind of got a little farther.
Okay. Okay, so this one sounds like he's definitely closer. If we cut over this mic and listen to it. Quite different, right? So if I were to put a little loop around this, you can tell that one is much farther back, picking up much more of the environment. Whereas this one's much better. So our process then is coming through each of these. The ones that we don't want, we'll right click on and go up and turn off the enable button. So rather than deleting the clip, which then leaves us without the clip should we ever need it again, or should we find that there's a problem with this one we didn't otherwise realize, we just disable it. And so essentially we're working our way down to just having the key things that we want. So once we've done that, we've got our essential sounds kind of chosen between all the different takes. We've used things like J cuts and L cuts to try to hone in on keeping a consistent sound narrative happening. We also are going to go through and want to create an initial balance. Now, for many of you that have only worked with the audio inside your video editor, that's really all you've ever done. So when we look at this, for example, that's a pretty decent balance of this. But if I listen to the other one,
I'm sure.
what we'll find is that some of these, for example, if we look at, I'm going to play back this section of his, turn on loop playback.
So
You see that he's averaging around -12 dB. -12 to -20 is going to be where you're wanting most of those sounds to sit. If they get too much higher than -12, we start to run out of headroom. Headroom being the amount of audio level we can continue to increase before it distorts. It hits all the way up at digital 0. So we're going to want to go through and do an initial little mix pass using just the simple volume keyframe adjustments to try to balance things out. So if I was trying to balance this, I might go through this section and look at it. Zoom out a little ways.
So
I'm sure.
official. I got the news.
Oh, Joe.
Okay, so these are pretty good. But what you can see is once you've gotten through this and you go through and you turn some of them up and down, that here's what the next one looks like. And again, you can download this demo session. So here you can see that we've got some of the clips that are brought up just a little bit, other ones that are brought down. But you'll also notice between most of these, we've started to add in crossfades. So if we move even one more, where we get to the point where we have now eliminated all of the extra pieces that we don't need. But what else do you see on this final dialogue track? How often do we have something like a crossfade on our clips? Every time. Why is that important? Why would we always have a crossfade on these things? Yeah, so if I were to come in here and take any of these pieces and take this without the crossfade.
This we did actually.
Wow. Wow. That's unbelievable. Really?
Depending on which take you're hearing, sometimes those background sounds can jump up or down. So a crossfade is going to go a long way towards minimizing the amount of transition we hear between them. And then in addition, we've used both the regular clip gain to adjust it and some keyframes to bring really loud parts down and bring really quiet parts up. Everybody's clear on that process? In addition, though, they've actually done a little bit of temping. So it created a temp track here in the audio where we added in just a maybe stock ambient sound just to see how well it hides the transitions on these dialogue parts. So a lot of times on these dialogue parts, it may just not sound right and there's no way to hide them without adding in another ambience track. So in this case, adding this ambience track, I'll solo it real quick, can go a long way towards hiding the edits between different sound levels and background levels on this. And then, of course, adding in a quick little music track as well.
Sure.
So then, once you've done your initial balanced mix in a video editor, typically is when you're going to be sending it off to an audio engineer, or if you have built those skills, you can do the same thing. So there's two approaches you can do this. One that you would use to send to any other audio workstation on the planet, and a different one if you were going to do your work in Adobe Audition, which is probably the easiest way to do it for this project. If you were trying to export this project and send it off to a professional engineer using Pro Tools or Logic or Nuendo, you go to your file menu, choose export, and you choose either an OMF or an AAF. Now, there's not really any reason anymore to use an OMF, but that was the original standard. And what it would do is it would send all of these audio clips. I don't think it would do crossfades. It might do keyframe audio, but it would not do any effects you've added to the tracks, any clip effects, any audio track effects. But it was kind of an intermediary file standard to get video projects with their audio clips over to an audio DAW. So it would at least move over all the plain audio clips so the engineer could then mix them. In recent years, as audio and video editing software has gotten better, Avid released a new file format, a new version called the AAF, the Avid audio format. And so you can then send these over, and things like keyframe automation and fades, things like that will carry over. So you could then open that AAF file in Pro Tools It's not going to have any soft effects like reverbs or compression, but it'll at least bring over all the audio files, the animation as well. For us, if you're going to be working in Adobe Audition, and this is one of the main reasons companies use the Adobe Suite, is because it has what they call dynamic link, where you can actually just round trip files between them all. So for Audition, you actually come to whatever sequence. So I'm going to just take this Happy Talk export. You can either select it and then go to the edit menu and choose edit in Adobe Audition and edit the whole sequence. When you do this, it's going to say, okay, I'm ready to do this. Where do you want me to save it? So you'll choose this and you'll put it all in its own folder. It'll say, what do you want to do? The entire sequence or just in to out? You can send the video through dynamic link, or you can actually export a little video file version of it, or just not send the video. What does audio handles mean? Anybody? For every one of these audio clips, what does handles mean? Why would we do 1 second? Well, that means every one of these little audio clips, we know that that's not where the clip starts and ends. If you were to actually trim it out, there could be minutes or more of audio on each side. And so what this comes from, this handles, is literally, it's a term from back when we would edit. I say we, I was never, this was before my time too, but you would edit audio. I have done audio and video editing by hand, but never professionally. So, but the audio, you would edit it and you would need to leave some amount of space in case you screwed it up. So it was literally handles to be able to grab the video piece that you were trimming out, or the film piece you were trimming out, or audio. So you would always leave yourself a little bit of space. So if you leave 1 second handles, every one of these clips will still be transferred over, but it will not keep the whole audio file. It'll only keep 1 second on each side of that. So if you need to tweak where that edit point happened a little bit, you can. And then finally, if you're doing dynamic link, you'll notice audio clip effects can actually be transferred, or you can render them into non-transferable effects. So that will actually burn that effect that you added onto the clip into the clip that goes over into Audition. So let's say that you design some really cool like telephone effect on the voice, and you're like, I don't want the engineer to mess with this or try to create his own. I nailed it. Then you could render that clip, and that clip would go over with that already burned in. What would happen though if the engineer was like, ooh, you messed it up, or it's got too much high end, we need to fix it? He wouldn't have the original file then. So that's what the render settings do, either remove the effects or render, and then you can do the same thing with pan and volume information and open it right up in Adobe Audition. So let me show you what that looks like over here on Audition. So in Audition, here you can see the process, and you all took either a survey from me or somebody else, but you can walk through and see this. We've got those initial dialogue tracks, and here you can see we've done a couple of things. So first, we've taken any of the tracks or the takes that we didn't end up using, and in the same way as in Premiere, we could just disable them. There's not really a handy disable thing here in the same way in this. You can mute tracks, but in this case, we just make a junk track. And that junk track is where you can store all those extra takes that you're not quite ready to get rid of. But by sticking them down there, you could still use them again if you needed to, or you can mute them individually. And then you can also simply mute the whole track, but you're not losing them. Then on our dialogue track, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. You'll notice that we've used loops of what we call room tone. So anytime you're capturing an interview or you're recording something where you're going to have audio that you need to keep and other parts where you don't, we need to capture some room tone of it, and enough room tone so that we can hide or stretch it out and play it underneath even dialogue bits. So let's see what that looks like. So here's a little piece of room tone, and we only had a few seconds of it. So you take that and then you're cross-fading it together to hide it when you repeat the same loop. But then you take this dialogue, and by extending that underneath, you can now keep that and make it sound still clean and transparent. Here's what that voice would sound like without that room tone underneath. Right? It sounds awkward. It leaps out of nowhere. But if you've got that room tone moving, it creates the illusion quite well. Now, in the same way as in Premiere, we saw crossfades on every single thing. Where do you see fades and crossfades on our audio and Audition? Every single thing again, right? Every single clip, unless there's absolutely no way there can be a click or a pop, we have a fade on it. In this case, we actually faded out the audio on this track, and faded in and out this one here. Let's see what would happen if we didn't fade in and out there. If I come up and I eliminate the fades on this, that's the other thing about Audition, a dedicated audio editor. You can make fades that are customized to the actual audio. Over here in Premiere, you can pretty much only, or at least easily only, put the fade on and make it longer or shorter. You can't really change the shape of the fade very well. You can kind of tweak it a little bit, but in a dedicated audio editor, this track, which would otherwise sound like this, where the audio and then it's gone, you can add a fade by dragging it over, of course, but then as you drag that fade up and down, it'll either, in this case, we could trim off as much of this excess as possible and have this come in right out of nowhere to where it goes basically from quiet to fully on. And then maybe we just fade out this end here gently. Let's see what that sounds like. Right, so then we don't hear any of the sound before, whereas if we use the more linear fade, you'll hear that ramp up. So not as easily on a little piece like this, but you can see then by having the audio or the room tone fade out as this other take comes in. By having that room tone added in underneath, we can really hide, make the whole thing seem. A lot more realistic, maintain the immersion. So then what do? Let me zoom out here, boom, boom. Then of course we go in and we start adding in our ambiences. So these ambiences, what is an ambience? When we talk about sound design, what do we mean by an ambience? Kayla. Yeah, so room tone is kind of an ambience, but typically it's the sound of whatever room we're actually in. Because if we just capture at least 30 seconds, why would you capture at least 30 seconds of room tone? And we'll typically do it right before the interview or right after the interview. Why would you grab at least 30 seconds? Could you do it with 10? Way easier to loop. If you've got a nice long sequence, if you have only a few seconds of it, or you're just trying to snip it from around the interview, then a lot of times you can have little bumps in the sound or things that you hear, and then they repeat every 10 seconds or 15 seconds. So we want to make sure that we use plenty of room tone, or we grab plenty of room tone, but then the ambiences can help build the world around it. So the room tone is used to hide edits, but the ambiences are used to start creating the universe that these people are in. So over here we saw, let's just jump back to the beginning. What are some things that you see in this environment? What are some ambiences that would help us recreate this world in the eyes of the viewer? In other words, what are things that they see, but because we're only hearing the lav mics, they're not going to hear, they weren't captured on set. Huh? Yep, so we've got a door close that needs to happen there. Door opens. Didn't quite hear it close. Anything else? And especially if I mute these and we're only using the original. Could have had some footsteps in there. It's clearly very different environments. We don't have the sound of other people in the store. I thought we saw other people in the store. There's at least a couple, so there should be something happening. But over here in Audition, we went and captured some coffee shop ambience. But also, how do we mix this in? Well, what do we call the first shot in a video that tells the viewer where we are and where this scene is happening? Establishing shot. What are some attributes of that establishing shot? It's usually what kind of a shot? Wide shot of the exterior or the interior, so the audience knows, because then their brain doesn't really need to think about it. We have to do the same thing with our audio. So you can see that in this case, with this ambience, that typically, especially because there's no dialogue here at the beginning of the scene, we can mix that ambience a little higher at first because it is establishing what's happening. And when people hear that, it's like, oh, okay, they're in an active, thriving restaurant or coffee shop. So you can see it's louder, but it comes down substantially whenever down to -19 versus right here, which is -10. So it comes down 9 decibels. So here's what that initial one sounds like. And then as the dialogue starts, or comes close, it's slowly fading down so that the room tone is filled in. But even that doesn't sound enough by itself. So here you can see we've added in another layer of air conditioner. It's not a whole lot to it, but that air conditioner also adds to the immersion of it. And then, because the very first thing we saw here in this video was a car driving past, what does the brain know is happening here? Your brain knows it, but your ears aren't hearing it. You should hear cars. You should hear cars. If they're driving past and we see them, but we don't hear them, our brain says the immersion is not working. And so see here, we've added yet another effects track where we've actually timed that car. We made sure to choose one that was far enough back. We didn't want a really close car. You wouldn't want like a roaring monster truck, but finding a slight sound of traffic in the background. And all three of those together combined to create. I'm going to mute this music. So those ambiences altogether create the sonic world that otherwise was not captured on set. Now, I lost a file here somehow, but we then once we've built our world with some ambiences, we start looking for things that are physically happening on the screen or that we know are happening, maybe just off screen, but that we don't hear. And those we call what? Anyone tell me? It's not an ambience, it's a simple sound that happens along the way. Special term for that? Hard effects. Hard effects are an actual sound effect. A lot of times people just think of those as sound effects, but a hard effect is your glass breaking, your foot stomping, the car door slamming, any of those things. And it's not about whether the sound is hard or soft. It's about a hard effect is, we need this sound in here. We need this specific sound. So here I had some doors slamming because when he walked in, the door closes and we don't hear it. So the brain says, something's missing here. I was thinking about this. I was watching a movie a while back. It's kind of a B movie. It's probably a religious movie that my mom made me watch. And so we were watching this and I thought, like, this was low budget. And the actor is walking through and the video looks great and the film looks great and the lighting looks great. But it was almost like they'd done virtually no sound design because these two people are walking, having this really sweet, like, conversation, but they're walking beside a stream in the forest. There's not a twig crunching. You can see the stream beside them. There's no water sounds. There's no birds. Like, it's the most empty forest I've ever experienced in a movie. And it was just like did the speakers break or did they just forget about doing the sound design for this scene? And it took me completely out. It was hard even to pay attention to what was happening. So something you want to be aware of is adding those hard effects does go a long way towards making it even work in the minds of the viewer. And then you can see the same thing with the music. So once we've gone through, of course, we'll spend a day actually, once you've started getting your sounds in here, and I want to get you guys out there recording them, but then what? Well, we'll look at a couple things. We will look at how to use it to fix things, removing noise, the kind of noises that you can fix with software, and the kind of noises that you cannot fix with software so that we can optimize our audio, make it as good as possible. And then ultimately, you got to get this back to Premiere. You need to get it back into Premiere. So there's a couple ways that we do that. First, we can either go through and in our, I'm blanking on where it's at in here. So export multi-track mix down, of course, is the simplest way. That would mix down all of the files into a single file. We've done that before and you could drag it back. Why would you do that or why would you not do that? When nobody has an answer, I always feel good about this. Like, okay, yes, Michaela.
Like you would clean up the sessions. You just have them in your file.
Yeah, if we just exported a single session back here, or a single audio file and dropped it in, fantastic, we're in good shape. Why not? So why wouldn't we do that? That's exactly it. It's at that point, then the editor or anyone editing in the video editing software can't really make any changes, even small changes. If the producer says, we really need a little bit more of this dialogue right there, you then can't go back and change it. We need a little less music, you can't change it. So what we usually do is we're going to export it as what's called a stem. So when we look at this, you can see that this audition session has been set up with bus tracks, and we've named them DX for dialogue, FX for sound effects, and MX for music. And what we do is we go through each one of these tracks, and instead of just routing all of the tracks to the main stereo bus, we can then route all of our dialogue tracks to the dialogue stem and change that there. We can go down to our effects track and route that, make it a little taller. Route that instead of to the sound effects, we can route it out to the sound effects stem or the music to the music stem. And then once we've done that, we go to our multi-track menu and we'll see the option to export to Adobe Premiere Pro. And when you bring that up, you'll see your options here. Number one, you have to do this, and this does it as what's called an XML file. So which is similar to an OMF and an AAF, except it can be used for a lot more things. And it just says, hey, use these media files in these places. And then once we choose the sample rate, you can choose to either export each track as a stem. When would we want to do that? So it still is going to render each of these audio files down to an individual unbroken audio file. So it would render this out, and each track would be its own audio file with or without all these other things. So you can say export each track as a stem, or export each bus, so the DX, FX, and MX tracks, or just mix down the whole thing and then open it in Premiere. So in our case, I actually went through and exported each bus. Why? Because then you can export those, import them back into Premiere, and then you have something that looks more like this. You can simply drag the files in, and now you've got just your DX stem, your FX stem, and your music stem. And the value of it is once you drop them in, all of your mix has been carried over. But if you need to turn up or down a word or two, or continue to make smaller edits, you can still go in and make those smaller changes to the stems without impacting the other things. If you need a little more ambience, or the producer wants a little more ambience or less music, you still have some control without having to transfer back hundreds of audio tracks into Premiere or dozens of audio tracks. There's a company here in town, Harrison Consoles, that produces film consoles almost exclusively. They've been doing it for 50 years. Maybe not quite 50, maybe 40, but their consoles are all, has anyone ever seen a film mixing console? They typically are 40 to 50 feet wide and typically have 300 to 1,000 channels of audio. Because when you're mixing something like a film, you'll literally have one section of that console that the person is mixing all the music tracks, somebody else that's mixing all the dialogue tracks, sound effects tracks, hard effects tracks, etc. Multiple engineers assigned just to mix the project. And then they mix that all down into a series of stems that then can be made into minor tweaks. Does the process make sense here in terms of what we do with this? Okay, so not just where we start with here inside of Audition or inside of Premiere, but how we then transfer it over into Audition, how we further refine it in there. We'll spend a day on with some EQ and compression to clean things up. You can really go a long way just with audio, automation, and fades in terms of blending your sounds together. You don't have to be an audio plugin expert to be able to balance things really well. And even a little bit of EQ knowledge can help get tracks out of their way. We'll look at that a little bit too. So questions about this? All right, so here's what I want you to do for now. Go ahead and open up ChatGPT and let's talk real quick about your videos and what sort of sound effects that you should be thinking to get for these. So for example, Justin, what is your video about? Sorry, I called you Justin. Shake, sorry, Shake friggin'.
Most recently,
I saw Justin in the hall last night right before I saw it. Got it.
most recently there was, I think it's 30 seconds anniversary of Deadpool.
Okay,
I wanted to do like a interview with that.
okay, so this is what your Project 3 video is about?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the things in it? So can you write me a list of sound effects to record for a video about what?
Creation of Deadpool.
Something went wrong. Try it again. Try a new chat. Bummer. I might need to log in. I can show you what the last one was of Deadpool, the movie. There we go. All right, so let's see what ChatGPT comes up with. Feel free to pop yours in too. Let it give you a nice little list of sound effects that you could use that could be really helpful. Okay, so gunshots and explosions, obviously sword swings and impacts, sure, punches, kicks, other fight sounds. Okay, those can be tricky to capture with a portable recorder. Sizzling and frying sounds, that's an interesting idea. Wouldn't have thought of that. Computer and technology sounds for CGI, voiceover recordings of lines, etc. Okay, somebody else, what's your video about? I will say this, in the last class, somebody said that their video was about, they were doing interviews with a friend that was working on Vanderbilt's new college basketball facility. And he had gotten a variety of sounds on his own that he thought of, just his own list, but he I think was an audio major, so he'd done a little bit of this before. But I said, yeah, can you give me a list of Foley sound effect ideas to capture for a video about building a new college basketball facility? And some of these were things he had not thought of. Hammering and sawing sounds for construction, sure. Heavy machinery, sound of construction workers shouting instructions to one another. He hadn't thought of that. Sound of concrete being poured into a mold. Hadn't thought of that. Sounds of players dribbling the ball, shooting and making baskets. Well, he didn't have any footage of people playing basketball, but he kind of realized like that would help tell the story better, as if he actually was able to integrate a few shots from the existing stadium since they're building the new one. So this is a great way to get ideas for things that you're like, oh, maybe I should add that into my story. Now, this is not a comprehensive list or the be all end all, but it is a great way to get a list of ideas for what you can do. So let's talk about some rules of thumb. When you're capturing your room tone for your interviews, capture it either right before or right after the interview. Typically right after is best because everybody can just be quiet and you can say, hang on, we're going to grab room tone. You can hit record and just let it roll for a minute. If you've got at least a minute of room tone, you're probably going to be okay to be able to hide anything else in the edit. If you are capturing your sound effects, somebody tell me what exactly the process you would take. You're going to have this Zoom recorder, and then what? You're going to walk out in these hallways to grab some sound effects. Tell me what you're going to do.
Turn it from 90 to
120? What do you mean?
no, never mind.
It's okay. But I mean the process of capturing your sound effect. Does everyone feel comfortable using the Zooms at this point? Okay. Going to record in stereo so that you're always capturing a nice stereo sound effect. What else though? So make sure that mono mix is turned off. Yep. 100% have your headphones on. But the other thing that you should do when capturing sound effects, the very first thing is this first thing you should do after you hit record on the video camera too, which is to what? Slate the sound. Why would that be important? Yeah, if I were, let's just jump over to here. Let's say I'm sitting here with this list of files. And you come back and you pop open a gigantic list of audio files. None of them are going to be named in a way that is going to be very helpful to you. And if you don't have a slate at the very beginning of that, here's what your process is going to be. What it like, is there a car that passes soon? Is there every take is going to start this same way, just like brrr. So what I want you to do is right off the bat, you hit record and you say, this is the water fountain from 1 foot away, water, the ding of the doorbell from, from 6 inches back, whatever it is, because then I've watched people working with their files in here and I realized, man, maybe I should teach you guys a better workflow for this. So when you drop all those files in, the very first thing you want to do is listen to them. If the slate is right off the bat every time, here's what you can do. So I'm just going to do these. Instead of opening these up, they open in Apple Music, it does its whole thing. All you have to do is open them up in list and spacebar. You should immediately hear, take one, blah, 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 blah. You can hit the return key with it already open. That puts it into rename mode. And you say, close up, dialogue, Susan. Return accepts it, down arrow moves to the next thing. Okay, so you don't even have to open it. You can literally use the space bar to just open it, to launch it, to listen to it. And if there's a slate, you can hit return, name it, return, and down arrow to jump straight to the next thing. So that will be way faster than anything else you will do being able to get all of these files named, and so then you can pull them in. One last thing, I want you to really pay attention to, can I borrow one of these real quick? When you are recording with these Zoom mics, there's a principle for audio that says with every doubling of the distance, the sound volume cuts by what? Every doubling of the distance from the sound source, the volume cuts by half. So what does that mean? Well, if I was recording an interview with Nico, then and I've got this, let's say a foot away, that if I move an inch or two forward or backward, is the volume going to change that much? If I'm a foot away or this far away, this is what, foot and a half? If I move an inch or two forward or backward, is the volume going to change that much? No. But if I have the microphone right here, then even an inch or two farther away is going to make a huge difference, because with every doubling of the distance, the volume will cut by half or increase by half. So when you're capturing it, we do want the microphone as close as possible, but typically that's being said when we're talking about a boom mic or something where we're trying to keep it out of the video frame. When we're capturing sound effects, we don't have to worry about it getting in the frame of the video because there's nothing there. That said, you don't necessarily want to put everything literally as close as the mic can get, because any change or movement in the microphone will create dramatic changes. So typically a foot to 16 inches, 18 inches away is going to be a good level, but also get one really close. In audio, we can go through and we can use reverbs and sound ambiances to push the sound farther back, but it's very difficult to make it sound closer to us. So you typically want to get it reasonably close. Okay. And then of course, like Sarah said, 100% of the time, once you've captured that sound and you hit stop, you immediately play it back. Just hit the play button and it should play the last file on these. Make sense? All right. So here's what I want you to do for the last, let's take 20 minutes. That'll get you the last 5 minutes of class. Hop on headphones, take a partner so that you can work together. And capture at least an initial list of sounds, start to grab some of the sounds. And then just for a reminder on the project. So Monday, we will be watching your project 3s. Everybody will be evaluating them as well. So some of the grade will come from your feedback from your classmates. We'll talk a little bit more about project 6, but I think for you guys, we really covered that already. I need to talk about it with the other class. And then next Wednesday, I'm at a music industry conference. So that will be the day I'm letting you just check out the Zooms and use the whole class to grab your sound design. Cool. Questions about that? We'll then spend a day going through and actually working on these projects, mixing them together, and then I can come around and I'll demo some things and then we'll work on your projects. And then that will be done. You'll have you'll have taken whatever you had for project 3 and improved it with quality audio. Yes. The ISO rooms.
Well, there's like, I believe we've only used Pulse Studio. That's fine.
No, and the objective is not necessarily to go through and do this. I'm only looking for something like, 10 to 12 sound effects in this project. And a 3-minute thing, your ambiances, I will say the one difference is your ambiances are going to be different throughout. If you've got a sit-down interview with somebody, you're going to use the same ambiances during those, but if you've got other B-roll happening, you won't necessarily need the same ambience there. You don't need to add a sound effect to every single visual that happens, just things that I think that draw the viewer's eye. So yeah, so when we play them back, if I were to play project 3 and project 4 back to back, I should see basically the same video, but the other one should feel a lot more immersive because it has more sounds and ambiances created. Excellent. Other questions? How confident do you feel about your ability to do this with the next 20 minutes? Okay, and you'll have next Wednesday to be able to work on it as well. All right, go ahead and grab, Jackie's got these recorders up here. Come and grab one. Make sure you have headphones. If you have to borrow or if you have to take one of the headphones attached to the IMAX, do not let anyone from Motion Pictures borrow them because I keep finding them stolen and over in that lab. So just don't let them do it. All right.